Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. Let's start the weekend out right with a fun video, and tonight we'll be looking at 5 really underrated Star Wars capital ships. Now, I'm saying really underrated specifically and not most underrated because, for one, I think that's a bit hard to quantify, and 2, because my focus here really is covering ships I haven't talked about a whole lot on the channel. Like, I recently did a video on the Acclimator. That realistically could make this list, but you guys probably already watched that video, or at least you can now. So in other words, I won't be choosing the Lancer or the Nebula Star Destroyer ship that I've already talked about. I've also, if I'm being honest, tried to make ships that I think look cool or at least are interesting. And starting off, we have the Assault Frigate, and this one is maybe cheating a little bit because the Assault Frigate, the Rebel or New Republic Assault Frigate specifically, was actually a modification of an existing ship type, specifically the Dreadnought class heavy cruiser. There were several situations where Dreadnought class heavy cruisers found their way into the hands of the Alliance and later New Republic. This was both a blessing and a curse. The Dreadnought was well armored, well armed, but it had an insane 16,000 crew requirement and wasn't the most fast and maneuverable vessel. What the Rebel Alliance and later New Republic did was heavily modify the ship, removing both parts of the ship's innards and also its superstructure, significantly decreasing the mass, while also rewiring the vessel so it could be used with automated systems. The Dreadnought, now Assault Frigate, became significantly faster and more mobile at the cost of obviously decreased armor and general survivability. Additionally, refitted Assault Frigates were typically given external clamps so that they could carry starfighters, and the 700-meter vessel typically had 15 turbo laser batteries and 35 quad laser cannons and laser cannons. That being said, each Assault Frigate was unique, and you see, for example, this two-pronged variety which could have had more weaponry, for example. And we're not talking about the Assault Frigate Mark II because that ship, I just don't like it. If you've read the Thrawn trilogy, you'll know that the Assault Frigate remained in very common use up until the New Republic era and beyond. According to the Starships of the Galaxy guide, the Alliance has precious few of these ships, mostly due to the expense of refitting captured dreadnoughts. However, those that have been put into service have performed exceptionally well, with no losses reported prior to the Battle of Endor. Alright, next up we have the Strike Cruiser, which for some reason I don't think I've talked about on this channel very often, despite it being a very common ship in Star Wars Legends. One also, by the way, that appears in the Thrawn trilogy. Returning to the Starships of the Galaxy guide, that source actually sums the ship up quite nicely. The Strike class is designed from the ground up to be a flexible, efficient, modular starship with half the functionality of a Victory Star Destroyer for 25% the cost. And yeah, these were basically the opposite of Imperial Star Destroyers. They were pumped out en masse, not created to strike fear, but were a pragmatic approach to many of the threats the Empire faced, and were often thrown into every battle possible, with losses frankly being acceptable. The modular part there is really key. Strike cruisers can be configured for a cargo capacity, for troop carrying, or even starfighter carrying. So strike cruisers can do everything from leading a fleet, to leading a ground engagement, to supporting much larger ships. Obviously, this isn't unique to the Strike Cruiser. We see, for example, the MTC, the Modular Task Force Cruiser, do something similar, but it's really the effectiveness and the way that these could be pumped out, I think, that really make this ship special. In fact, the Imperial Sourcebook says the Lorinar Strike class cruiser has been called the fleet's best kept secret. With a surprising combat effectiveness, Lorinar has designed a vessel that can be mass produced in a limited amount of time with a drastically lowered cost. However, that source also notes that because of the modular nature of the Lorinar Strike Cruiser, it is susceptible to having entire systems going out when it starts to sustain internal damage. Next up, we have the Brahatok, or the Dornian class gunship, and I've got to say, I'm pretty happy that Star Wars canon has embraced that ship. For those who don't know, the Brahatok does appear briefly in Return of the Jedi. You can't really see it. Star Wars canon has used it quite often. Now, to be fair, you wouldn't actually call this a capital ship, so I guess I've clickbaited you, but whatever, we're halfway through. The Dornian gunship was 90 meters long and was an anti-fighter gunship with some anti-capital ship capabilities. Specifically, it had a set of 8 double turbo laser cannons, which presumably were easily light enough to target starfighters, and also 8 concussion missile launchers. I like this ship because it fits a role that you don't see filled very often, especially within the Rebel Alliance Navy. A small, fast gunship which serves somewhere between a freighter, like the Millennium Falcon, Falcon or a starfighter, and a corvette. Fast enough to screen against starfighters, but also significantly more powerful than any single fighter. Obviously, the trade-off there is these are a lot more crew intensive, a lot more resource intensive, but it really would have helped to protect these large, more vulnerable capital ships. And unlike the last ship, these were specialized. No hangar space, nothing for a ground invasion, just killing starfighters. The ship actually doesn't get that much additional lore, but we do know that Brahatoks helped the Dornians defend their homeworld from the Empire, and that one of these ships, commanded by Etienne Abbot, who you definitely recognize if you've read Star Wars Legends, held off the Eminence, a much larger Carrack-class cruiser, more than triple its size, as life pods from the Liberty were picked up. Then the other Brahatok, the Tortorok, actually came in and destroyed the Carrack from behind. So that's, I don't know, pretty sick. Sticking with the Rebels, I guess I'm a little bit biased here, is the MC-80B. I've done a full video on the MC-80B, including a commissioned animation, which I really like, and that's because the ship's pretty cool. The Rebels basically realized that their janky fleet was not prepared to deal with the big scary threats of the galaxy as they became the New Republic, and as Star Wars Fact File 96 explains, when the New Republic sought to commence larger scale operations against Imperial warlords, they realized they needed something else. As they were designing and producing the next generation of Mon Calamari cruisers, which would take some time, that was the MC-90 by the way, they did the MC-80B. These were not purpose-built warships, they were repurposed vessels like the MC-80 class, but had more extensive upgrades and were generally very impressive. Specifically, the MC-80B improved on the already incredible shielding and hull strength of the Mon Calamari cruiser, meaning that these ships could actually pretty easily outlast an Imperial Star Destroyer in a slugging match. The ship relied not only on its weapons, but especially its starfighters, of which it could carry several squadrons. Each MC-80B was slightly different. The most famous, of course, was the Mon Ramonda, a ship that performed well under the command of Han Solo as he was hunting Warlord Zinj. And yeah, the ship overall just performed well, which isn't surprising given the fact that it was in between two really great generations of vessels, the MC-80 and the MC-90, just often forgotten about because it was in that sort of middle role. The Mon Ramonda would actually be destroyed, but would go down valiantly holding off the Empire during the evacuation of Mon Calamari in Operation Shadow Hand. Alright, this last entry is a very quick one, and that's because we don't know a lot about it. That is the Chiss class Star Destroyer. The later Star Wars Legends books had all of these cool ship types that we never really saw, but we read about on page quite a bit. For example, the Galactic class battle carrier, or the Blue Diver, which was a Mon Calamari heavy carrier, the various new Star Destroyers used by the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances. I'm choosing the Chiss Star Destroyer just because the premise is really simple. It was essentially an amalgamation of Chiss and Imperial technology. The ship's described as being Star Destroyer in shape, but without the hull details and general weak spots of a Star Destroyer. I imagine it would have looked quite striking, with only really a dome interrupting the ship's smooth surface. Again, we've never seen this ship, so I can't even include footage of it here, but just something to think about it. That, however, is all I've got for you guys. Until next time, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.